Our reading today is taken from Matthew chapter 13, verses 1 to 9, and it's the parable of the sower. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, "A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. He who has ears, let him hear." That parable will be familiar to many of us. God sows the seed, the good news, and it grows in different ways. Or maybe it doesn't even take root. I wonder if you've ever thought about it this way, and I hadn't until this week. What if the seed that God sows is also individual good things that he tries to plant into our own individual lives or the life of our church? He sows the seeds of good things, but what happens to those seeds within us? I find that an interesting thought. It's not just global, not just about all of the people of the world. We could see it as much more personal. We know that God gives us many good gifts, and we know that seeds have fallen on good soil within us because we benefit from them. Answered prayers, loving relationships, a new job, increasing fruits of the Spirit. We'll all have our own seedlings and fully grown plants that we can identify. I'm sure there's many that we don't know about. Perhaps God has protected us from a dangerous situation and we weren't even aware of his intervention. And perhaps we just take the normal things of life for granted and don't see them as gifts. James 1 verse 17 reminds us that every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who doesn't change like shifting shadows. So we know that some of the seed falls on good soil in our lives. But what of the other seeds that he sows in us that don't take too well? Well, let's take a quick look at Jesus' explanation of the parable, which you can find later on in the chapter in verses 18 to 23. Jesus says that the seed that falls on the path is the message of the kingdom that is not understood and is snatched away from the enemy. I wonder what messages, truths about the kingdom we have heard but not understood. Or maybe we have not wanted to understand because it has challenged us too much. There will be some seeds that fall on rocky ground in our lives. Roots grow, but not much. But something is happening, and while things are going well, all is good. But when the going gets tough, we can fall away. Jesus related this to when we experience trouble or persecution because of the word. Have there been times when we have backed off our faith because it was too hard to stick with? I wonder what those little seedlings might have grown into if we had stood firm. And then we have the seeds choked by thorns. Jesus says the thorns are the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth, and that the seeds would be unfruitful. He is so keen for us to bear fruit in so many different ways, but we can hold ourselves back. I think it's inevitable that some of the seeds won't grow, or we won't nurture them. That's something to reflect on, isn't it? But we must also remember that God is good all the time, not just once. He's always full of grace, and He is continually sowing seeds into our lives. He's the God of second chances, and third, and fourth, and fifth, and so on, without end. Well, let's move on now and think about this last week. We've had some much needed rain, and I'm sure the farmers will be pleased. And actually at this very moment it is raining just a little bit. That's why I've come under our gazebo to take shelter. And it can feel a bit miserable when it's raining, can't it? But the rain is necessary. It brings growth and good things. And I find that my garden seems to grow better when it's been watered by the sky rather than the hose pipe. If we think about the rain being the tough times in our lives, we can think about how we grow through them. We learn about ourselves, others, and God. It might not be pleasant, and it can be very painful, but we can come out the other side wiser and with a deeper knowledge and a connection with God. We might learn new skills, abilities, or strengths that we have. We might have built up our resilience, or we might be in a new position to be able to help other people. Sometimes we might just scrape through, glad that we have survived. James 1 verses 2 to 4 say this: "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." But the thing is, while the plants we want to grow, so do the weeds. When we go through a tough time, the weeds of resentment, guilt, anger, self-righteousness, hatred, loss of confidence, many other negative things can grow up within us. And when the sun comes out, which it always does, we feel so much better, and we can experience the good things once again with joy. However, we do need to be watching out for those weeds. We need to be aware of them, asking God to kneel with us as we take stock and help us pull them out. They may be stubborn or painful to uproot, but it is necessary to let the good things flourish. Weeds use up the water and nutrients in the soil, and they suck the life away from the fruitful and the beautiful. And that's just the same in our own lives. God does not want us to live stunted lives. He has so many good things to bless us with, and we need to make sure that there's room for those good things to grow. Sometimes we don't notice the weeds until we look more closely. Just like with this beautiful plant. I'm sitting next to it for a reason, because I want to show it to you. This is my favourite plant in our garden this year, and there's going to be a close-up picture of it so you can see the detail. It's called Galaxy, and it's a nighttime petunia, and the flowers look like the universe, and I think it's really wonderful. Joe and I were looking at this plant together a few days ago, and taking note of the colour together, Joe decided that he would call this plant the dairy milk plant. I'm sure you can see why. And as we looked at it together, I noticed a tiny, tiny white flower. And I expect those of you who are gardeners have already noticed this, probably just after I started talking. You may have noticed there are things growing in this that don't belong, because the tiny little white flowers that I found, like this one up here, that's a weed. It's not actually the plant. And I hadn't even noticed. I just, from a distance, but even fairly close up, I looked at it and thought, what beautiful colours, the green looks vibrant, all is good. But when I noticed, I realised that actually, probably now, more than half of the greenery in here, the green that you see, is weeds. That's not very good, is it? So they will need to come out. And I don't think that's going to be an easy job, because even in the last few days since Joe and I were talking about this, they have grown an enormous amount, and I'm going to have to get stuck right into the bottom to try and get them out. So I think that's a job for another day, or later on today maybe, if the sun comes out. Are you in a sunny or a rainy season of your life at the moment? Or perhaps it's a case of sunny spells with some showers. There's going to be a picture now of this plant with the weeds growing through. And there's going to be a short time to reflect on what's been said and to allow God to guide your thoughts. So think for a moment. Are there any weeds growing in your life that need to be pulled out? Well, if there are, ask God to do this gardening task with you as a guide, a comforter, a friend, and a healer. We're going to sing again now. First, Great Are You, Lord, and then a beautiful song called O Come to the Altar, the Father's Arms Are Open Wide.